And now on Rough Diamond Radio, Part 5 of Hengist's Inheritance.
Chapter 22. Wilberforce Shelby looked lazily up at his office clock. It showed 3:15 p.m. That'll do for today, he thought, and started to tidy up his paperwork on his desk. When he'd finished this, to his satisfaction, which comprised of pushing the paperwork into one pile and moving it onto the windowsill, he then rose from behind his desk, pulled on his coat, grabbed his hat, and exited his office. Just off to my meeting with Ronald Plumley, Doris. I'd be late back, I'm sure, so if you could lock up, dear lady, I'd be most grateful. Meeting with Ronald Plumley, Mr. Shelby? There's nothing in the book, queried Doris. I'm aware of that, Doris. He called earlier today, and he asked me to pop up to see him at 4 p.m. today, but if it makes you happy, you may put it in the book now, said Shelby, as he closed the front door of the office behind him. Doris gritted her teeth. Lazy lying waster, she muttered. Soon Shelby was driving his small black Morris 8 up the drive to the hall. Instead of pulling directly outside, or turning left around to the kitchen door and tradesman's entrance, Shelby passed across the front of the hall, though a brick archway, and then brought the car to a halt, next to a white sports car, parked on a patch of gravel at the side of the veranda, which Ronald Plumley used as his private entrance to the east wing. Shelby climbed the 8 steps to the veranda and rapped on the glass pane in the door. After 2 minutes waiting, he knocked again and was rewarded with a loud voice. Yes, I'm coming. Shelby then could see the rotund frame of Ronald Plumley, clad in a Japanese print smoking jacket, walking towards the doors. After turning the key in the lock, he pulled the door open. Shelby, old boy, come in for God's sake before you knock the damn door down. Thank you, Ronald, replied Shelby as he stepped into the room. New car, Ronald? Shelby inquired. What, old boy? I like your new car, Shelby pointed back through the windows at the white sports car. Ronald Plumley caught on. Oh yes, it's not mine, old boy. I had a friend drive me home from Frambourne last night. Too much bubbly, don't you know? Eager to change the subject, added. Pour us a drink, Shelby, and then you can explain all this damn cloak and dagger stuff. Ronald Plumley maneuvered his frame to an easy chair, while loosely waving his hand towards a decanter of whiskey and several glasses that resided on a sideboard. Certainly, Ronald, said Shelby, and scuttled over and started to pour out 2 large whiskeys with its accompanied clinks and clatter. Then drinks poured. He handed one to Ronald and scuttled away to a chair opposite. Ah yes, well, Ronald, it's like this. Well, how can I put? Well, spit it out, man, said Ronald Plumley, rolling his eyes to the ceiling. He knew of old how Shelby could waffle on. Take a deep breath, Shelby. Then get on with it, for God's sake, or we'll be here all day, he barked. Yes, of course, Ronald. It's like this. I have come into possession of information that may be financially beneficial to us. Not shares again, Shelby. For your information, I lost a pile on your last scheme. No, not shares, Ronald, Shelby reassured him. As you are well aware, I have privileged information crossing my desk each and every day. Well, today a letter came into my possession that... Shelby considered how to continue. Best you read it for yourself. Shelby pulled the piece of paper that he'd copied Hengist's letter on, and raising out of his seat, walked over and handed it to Ronald. He then sat back down, picked up his glass, and sipped at its contents in silence while his friend read through the letter. After a while, Ronald Plumley placed the piece of paper down, picked up his drink, studied it for a moment, then took a large gulp. Are you suggesting, Shelby, old boy, that we find this? He glanced down at the piece of paper. Jerome Whittle, retrieve this mentioned package and split the proceeds between us, thereby denying this individual his inheritance? The way I look at it's Ronald. The letter clearly states the items, whatever they are, were acquired nefariously, and therefore they are not this individual's property to bequeath in the first place. In the second place, he states himself that should we or anyone else retrieve the package first, so be it. Shelby shrugged his shoulders and settled further back into his seat with a smug look on his face. He knew he was on safe ground given the fact Ronald Plumley was as crooked as he was himself. Very good point, Shelby. I mean, if it's not his property to dispose of, I suppose it's open season, old boy, said Ronald Plumley with a knowing smirk on his face. Shelby nodded in agreement. The fact the letter could have been left to a 90-year-old widow to supply her with her only source of income to keep her out of the workhouse and have in her possession a providence for the items going back to Joan of Arc. Ronald Plumley and Wilberforce Shelby were still going to try and get this package. They sat in silence for a while, then Ronald Plumley spoke. And you have no idea who this Jerome Whittle is? None at all, Ronald, sorry. We don't even know where to start looking. Maybe this Grump fellow knows who Jerome Whittle is. Grump? Who on earth is he? That's who the letter is addressed to, Ronald. Oh, I see. We could have this fellow followed, I suppose. Then answering his own question added, impossible, not 24 hours a day. Ronald Plumley placed his drink down on the table. I wonder, he said, getting out of his chair and walking to the door. Get us both a refill, old boy, will you? Back in a minute. Shelby, as requested, refilled their glasses, placing Ronald's glass back next to his chair, and resumed his own seat just as Ronald Plumley re-entered the room holding a large book. Ronald Plumley dropped heavily into his seat. Now let's have a look, he said, putting his glasses on and opening the book. Look at what, Ronald? Well? Ronald Plumley started to explain as he thumbed through the book. Anybody who's anybody will be in Who's Who, so let's see if this damn fellow is. Whittle. Jacob, Jeffrey, Julius. Bugger. No Jerome Whittle. Ronald tossed the book down with a thud. Ronald. Yes, what? What year is that volume of Who's Who? 1937, why? Just a thought, maybe there is a Jerome Whittle in previous volumes. Yes, yes. Ronald skeptically replied, it's worth a try, I suppose. Follow me then, he said, raising himself out of his chair. As he reached the door, glass in hand, added over his shoulder. Bring the scotch, Shelby. Shelby grabbed the decanter as he passed and scuttled out after his partner in crime. They walked down a plush corridor with its red velvet drapes, age-worn oak paneling, and the odd-potted aspidistra. Passing an open door, Shelby turned his head to look in, and was rewarded with a view of the owner of the white sports car. She was sitting at a dressing table facing the window, with her back to the door, brushing her straw-colored hair. She wore only a bra and frilly knickers. Shelby stopped to look. He was interrupted. Shelby? When you're ready. I'll introduce you later if you like. Then under his breath, as he turned and walked on. Don't think you could afford the vixen anyway. They walked further down the corridor, until Ronald Plumley reached another heavy-studded door and pushed it open, and they both entered what was evident to Shelby, the library. Put the drinks down and help me, said Ronald Plumley. Soon they were sitting at the large table that occupied the center of the room, a pile of books in front of each of them. How far do these books go back, Ronald? Asked Shelby, stifling a sneeze from the dust coming off the disturbed books. I believe they started in 1849, old boy. That's 91 volumes to look through. Best you shut up and get on with it then, Shelby, snapped Ronald Plumley, taking a large mouthful of his whiskey. They both continued their search in silence for the next hour, only stopping to refresh themselves with a sip of their drinks. Then Shelby cried out. I think I got him. Ronald placed his volume down and looked at Shelby over the rim of his glasses. Shelby continued. Frederick Grayson Whittle, born the 1st of February 1875. chairman of Whittle Industries, son of, ready for this? He asked, not waiting for a reply. He continued. Jerome Whittle, founder of Whittle Industries, and the Pall Mall Home for Fallen Women, born the 4th of December 1822, died the 3rd of December 1899. Ronald Plumley considered this news for a few seconds. Don't be daft, Shelby. That means, if that was the man, that the letter was given at least 40 years ago to a man in his 70s to keep safe. That Jerome Whittle, he pointed towards the book Shelby held to emphasize his point, is long gone from this world, old boy. Suppose you're right, Ronald. Shelby closed the book and picked up another one. He started to giggle. I know the letter said this Whittle would be in no condition to verify a caller, but maybe we could have a séance and ask him. I mean, thinking about it, the letter was dated in 1936, and this Jerome Whittle had popped off 35 years earlier. He'll be a handful of dust by now. 37 years earlier to be precise, old boy, said Ronald Plumley, but he was thinking of other things. What does that letter say about Whittle, exactly? He asked. Shelby took the copy of the letter out of his pocket, scanned down. It says, however, Mr. Whittle is in no condition to verify who you are, so should. Is? Bloody is. In no condition. He is in no condition to verify a person, because the sod's already dead, exploded Ronald Plumley. And what better headstone to have but a green angel? Yes. Damn it, I think you have it. Ronald, you're a genius. I have my moments, old boy, don't you know? Ronald Plumley preened. What's next, Ronald? Ronald Plumley considered Shelby for a second. Not one of life's deep thinkers, he decided. We find out where he's buried, Shelby, that's what. How in God's name are we to do that? Ronald Plumley stroked his mustache. Not sure, old boy, not sure. Leaving the books scattered around, they picked up their glasses and the decanter with its depleted contents, walked back to the sitting room. Passing the still open door to the bedroom, Shelby snuck a quick glance, only to be disappointed. The room was empty. When again they were settled in their easy chairs, with the decanter's contents topped up and their glasses recharged, it was Ronald Plumley who spoke first. Whittle Industries, What time is it, old boy? Shelby looked at his pocket watch. 6:30. Why? It's worth a try. Ronald Plumley said. It's worth trying what? Said Shelby, and was quickly waved to be quiet, as Ronald stretched over picked up the phone. Hello, operator. Yes, you can help. I would like to make a call to Whittle Industries. Yes, I believe they are in London. After being asked to wait, a minute passed until the connection was made, and a crisp, effeminate voice came on the line. Whittle Industries, the voice said. Ronald Plumley straightened up in his chair. Ah yes, my name is Henry Hyman. How can I help you, Mr. Hyman? Well, and I'm sorry for calling out of hours. Not a problem, sir. I'm here all night to help. Very grateful, I'm sure. The thing is, I'm writing a piece for the Times newspaper about industrialists of the past, and I was wondering if I could talk to anyone about the founder of Whittle Industries, Mr. Jerome Whittle. Not too sure I personally can help you with that, sir, as I've only been here 5 years, but if you call back tomorrow, the press office will, I'm sure, be able to help you out. Yes, I'm sure they could, but my deadline is tonight, you see, and I only need clarification of a few points, and may I be frank with you? I'm sorry, I didn't catch your name. My name is Timothy, sir. Well, Timothy, I'll be frank with you. I'm up against it here and I need your help. The information I need is not sensitive in any way, and as I said, I'm on a very urgent deadline. And I'm of course willing to pay for your help. Pay? Ronald Plumley's ears picked up. He could tell he had Timothy's attention now. Also, he'd not missed the slight effeminate tone to this young man's voice. With his uncanny gift for picking up on people's weakness, Ronald Plumley decided to take a chance. Yes, Timothy, as for payment. Shall we say 4 pairs of silk stockings and a matching pair of French knickers, any size you like? I'm sure you know someone who'll enjoy those. I can have them cabbed over to you tonight. Well, I don't know. What sort of information is it you want? All I need is the date of his death and where he's buried, Timothy, but I need the information tonight. Timothy thought for a moment, then said, "What color French knickers?" Ronald Plumley grinned wickedly. He'd hooked his fish. All there was to do now is reel him in. "White, red, black, whatever you want. I have contact in the lingerie shop, Madame Swish in Soho," said Ronald Plumley, telling his first truth since starting the phone call. There was a slight pause. Then, in a voice no more than a whisper, Timothy said, "Okay, make the, items black and call back in half an hour and I'll see what I can find out." "Thank you, Timothy," but Timothy wasn't there, he was gone. Ronald replaced the handset and took out a cigar out of his inside jacket, and was soon blowing plumes of smoke up towards the ceiling. Shelby looked on. The next 30 minutes passed easily enough, with both men enjoying a good cigar and more good whiskey. Ronald Plumley eventually crushed the stub of his cigar out and picked up the phone, and was soon reconnected with Whittle Industries. "Hello again, Timothy." "Yes, thank you for calling back, sir. We were lucky. It was a bit difficult it being so long ago and all, but there is an old cleaning lady who remembers old Mr. Jerome Whittle, and she says he died on December 3, 1899, and is buried at Brookwood Cemetery in Surrey. She says she's certain because the Whittle family paid for 100 workers of Whittle Industries to attend, and she was one of them. She also said something about it being the first time she'd been on a train. I'm not sure what that has to do with it still. Is that okay, sir?" "Excellent, Timothy, excellent." Then, before Timothy could inquire after his payment, Ronald Plumley hung up. "It looks, old man, as if a trip to Surrey tomorrow is in order. You know where he's buried, Ronald?" "Yes, old boy, I do." Chapter 23. 7 a.m. the next day found Hengist and Harriet, after dropping Nobby off to spend the day with Alf, standing in the chill of the morning at the railway station. Hengist was impressed, and not a little surprised with the transformation made to the station now the country was at war. Every pane of glass, and there was a considerable number, now sported a sticky tape X intended to reduce injury and damage from any bomb blast. Another precaution was a 6-foot-high sandbag wall laid around the entrance to the waiting room. Hengist even noticed the bulbs had been removed from the platform lights. "Is it me, Hengist, or are there a lot more people in uniform than normal around?" Harriet asked. Hengist took his attention away from study of the air raid precautions, and perused the 20 or so fellow passengers waiting on the platform. There were indeed a fair few uniforms in the crowd. At a quick scan, Hengist thought uniformed persons made up about 50% of the assembled group. "Yeah, only to be expected, I suppose, us being at war and all." Further discussion on the subject was cut short by the distant sound of the expected 7:15 a.m. to London. The schoolboy in Hengist stirred as he looked back down the railway track to watch the train's arrival. It slowed down as it approached the platform. There followed the hiss of escaping steam and clanking metal, as each carriage lightly jostled their neighbor. All this culminating in a louder hiss of the brakes as the train came to a stop. This final escape of steam was the signal for the start of another cacophony of sound. That of the carriage doors opening and banging against the carriage sides. This, in its turn, was followed by the semi-urgent hustle of the departing passengers, while the embarking travelers found somewhere to sit and stow their larger packages on the wire racks above the seats. Hengist and Harriet found a half-empty carriage near the engine, taking their seats just as a whistle sounded. With another further hiss of steam and accompanied clanking, the train pulled off and continued its way. Soon it was rhythmically clattering down the track towards London. Hengist sat back in his seat and watched the outside world passing by. Up at the hall, Ronald Plumley clattered his coffee cup back onto its saucer. Shelby was across the table tucking into his breakfast. "Well, Shelby, best we get started. Quick, the word sharps the action is the order of the day, I think." "Right you are, Ronald," replied Shelby, stuffing a large piece of sausage into his mouth. "We'll take the rolls, I think." It'll look more in keeping with the destination, Plumley said. Rising from the table, they retrieved their hats and coats from Plumley's study, then continued through the patio doors to where a shiny Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow sat waiting. Ronald fired the engine, and they were soon crunching down the gravel drive en route to Brookwood. Chapter 24. Hengist sat back and watched the countryside pass by the window. He considered how different the view from a moving train was from the normal pedestrian one. When walking down a street of neat red brick houses with their tended gardens, scrubbed steps, and painted gates, you get the impression of order, correctness, and the feeling that all is as it should be. But traveling by train, you see behind that facade. You see an old tin bath propped up against a rickety fence, flaky paintwork, and leaky guttering. You may see an old man, newspaper under his arm, walking down the garden path to the outhouse for his morning bowel movement. Yes, it could be said, thought Hengist, the view from the train was a view of real life, not some sanitized approximation. Hengist dragged his thoughts back to his current situation, and felt a pang of concern. There's so much they didn't know, so much that could go wrong. What if someone caught them? He could lose his job. Christ, he could even go to prison. Was what he planned to do classed as grave robbing? Didn't they hang Burke and Hare? He thought of the tools he had hidden in Harriet's paint box, just in case they were required. He looked up at Harriet, who smiled at him. He smiled back. No, he was being daft, letting his imagination run wild like that. He needed to get a grip. They'll be fine. He went back to gazing out of the window. The journey from Wallop-on-Sea to Waterloo was not an overly long one, so before too long, the view from the train, of hay fields and grazing sheep, gradually gave way to the houses and factories of the suburbs of the metropolis that is London. 10 minutes later, the train's forward momentum eased, its speed reduced, and slowly came to a halt with a final hiss of steam. Then came the clatter and bangs, as the doors of the carriages were flung open and the passengers exited. Hengist and Harriet rose from their seats, picked up their bags, and left the carriage. After a short walk along the platform, and having their ticket inspected by a gruff railway employee, Hengist and Harriet found themselves standing in the middle of Waterloo Station, looking around like two children on a school trip. "Okay, where to now?" inquired Harriet, warming to the task. "I suppose we find which platform goes to Brookwood. Somehow I thought there'd be one platform with a queue of coffins or something after what is said in that book." "Well, there doesn't seem to be an undertaker or coffin in sight, my petal." They both looked around as if to confirm this point. "There's a ticket office over there. I'll go ask them. Wait here, sweet pea." As Hengist walked off, Harriet took in her surroundings. As far back as she could remember, she had gotten a thrill out of coming to London. The bustle and noise, the hundreds, no thousands of people going about their day, paying little or no heed to the people milling around them. The red double-decker buses and black taxicabs, ferrying hordes of unknown people to who knows where, home, work, a lover's tryst, or one of a million other destinations. She especially liked the anonymity London offered. Unlike Wallop-on-Sea, where everyone knew everyone else's business. You bought a yard of satin material off the market Saturday afternoon, and everybody in the town knew the color of your knickers by Monday morning, but London was different. A person could be themselves in London. She felt a wave of excitement course through her. This was an adventure, to be sure. Hengist returned. "Apparently, we have to leave the station by the main exit there." He pointed across the station. "Turn right and it's 50 yards away. Also, I am reliably informed we can't miss it." "Right you are, handsome," said Harriet, putting her arm through Hengist's. They walked out of the station as directed. The ticket clerk directions were good, as Hengist and Harriet soon found themselves looking on what was without doubt a funereal crowd. If the solemn demeanor and sober dress of the assembled crowd was not proof enough that they had arrived at the right station, the words London Necropolis Railway that adorned the building in front of them was. As Hengist looked for a suitable passage through the crowd, he became aware that even as there was no obvious demarcation line, the crowd was separated into two distinct groups. One group well-dressed, with ladies attired in smart black dresses, fascinators perched on well-coffered heads. The men appropriately dressed in black frock coats, top hats, and silk cravats. In contrast, the second and larger group sported a more varied everyday attire. Cloth caps and headscarves being the head covering of choice. A few black armbands were thrown in for good measure. This second group, unlike the first, also contained several children, whose ages ranged from babes in arms to sulky adolescents. Along with the sartorial divide, it struck Hengist there was also a discernible difference in attitude and behavior between the groups. The top hat and fascinator brigade stood stiffly, almost unmoving, and should the need to interact with another member of the party arise, it was undertaken in whispers with attendant slight bows and doffing of hats. Whereas the cloth cap and scarf ensemble were decidedly more vocal, with even a short laugh emitting from them now and again, which drew looks of displeasure from the other party, who scowled ineffectively in the general direction of the perceived hilarity. "I guess that what we have to do now is find out where we get a ticket from," Hengist said. "I suppose so, darling," Harriet said, eyeing the crowd nervously. "There must be a ticket office in there somewhere." "Well, let's go find it, I suppose," said Harriet again, taking Hengist's arm and leading him into the assembled throng. They passed through crowd with a few smiles and excuse-me's. They then carried on under a high, ornate marble arch which led to a large cobbled courtyard. Here smaller groups of people congregated around several different waiting rooms that lined the edges. At the far end of the courtyard, a smaller archway led to the station platform at which a train could be seen waiting. Hengist noticed a name chalked on a slate which was screwed to the door of each waiting room. Concluding correctly, this was to separate and identify each individual funeral party. "The Hengist?" "Over there," Harriet exclaimed. Hengist looked in the direction Harriet had gestured, to see a small sad ticket window, out of which a blotchy rotund face peered. Hengist and Harriet walked over. "Morning," said Hengist cheerfully to the ticket clerk. "Morning," came the reply in a surprising squeak of a voice. Hengist looked at the ticket clerk properly. His face was round, his hair slicked back tight to his head. His features were cherubic in proportions and shape. But that is where any likeness to such an angel ended. This set of features, if they did indeed belong to a cherub, it was one who evidently had a liking for strong drink and tobacco, and for whom visits to a dentist were not too high on their list of priorities. "2 returns to Brookwood, please," said Hengist. "Glad you want returns, sir. We only sell one-way tickets to the deceased." The ticket clerk smiled, showing a row of derelict tombstones that had once been teeth. Hengist smiled at the obvious fact of this statement, and warmed to the clerk. "Yes, sorry, I suppose you do," a thought came to Hengist. "What are the times of the return trains, by the way?" "There is only one train there and back a day, sir, and that today is due to leave this station at 10:40 a.m., and normally the return journey departs Brookwood at 2:30 p.m. after the interments are completed." "That'll be 3 shillings, please, sir." Hengist handed over a 5-shilling note. "Maybe you could help me." "Yes, sir. We, that is my wife and I, are going to pay our respects to an old family friend, and we are not sure where in the cemetery they are laid to rest. Is there anyone who could furnish us with that information?" "Yes, sir. They have all such details at the cemetery office, which you'll find in the station building." The clerk thought for a second, then added, "So, you aren't a member of any of the parties being interned at Brookwood today, sir?" No, is that a problem?" "No, not at all, sir." The clerk reassured Hengist. "It just may be an idea, sir, as you're not with any individual party, that you travel in the last carriage with the clergy and staff." "Sorry, I don't get you," said Hengist, puzzled. "Well, sir, it has happened a few times, mistaken identity like." "Oh, yes," the clerk explained. "We had one last week, sir, where a gentleman mistakenly got in the carriage of another funeral party, and an old lady who was a bit—" The clerk tapped a finger to the side of his head, by way of explanation. Got it into her head that the gentleman was the husband who ran away 30 years previously. She promptly set about him with her walking stick, and by the time her family stopped her, the poor gentleman required medical help. I take your point. Best we use the last carriage then, as you say. The clerk nodded his head. It would be for the best, sir. Better safe than sorry, especially today, sir. What's special about today then, mate? Well, sir, the clerk said, leaning forward conspiratorially. The fact is, sir, we have 6 funerals booked for today's train. 4 are your standard run-of-the-mill affairs, but the other 2 are a bit trickier, you see. Oh yes, why's that? Hengist was now intrigued. Well, one is for the internment of Jack Willis, better known as Big Jack, the landlord of the Limping Ghost in Bethnal Green. Ever been there, sir? No, can't say I have. Maybe that's just as well if you take my point, sir. Rough class of customers, if you get me. Yes, I do, but surely this being a funeral and all, there wouldn't be trouble, would there? Hengist realized the stupidity of this assumption. As everyone knows, funerals came a close second to weddings for family punch-ups. Under normal circumstances, I would agree, sir, I'm sure, but... Yes, sir, there most definitely is a but. And that is the other internment is for Sir Stephen Morris QC, who was a prominent member of the Bar and a Queen's Counsel, and who in the line of his duties often had to prosecute many a miscreant in the Bethnal Green area. Some of whom without doubt included many of Big Jack's clientele, sir. I see the problem you have, and thanks for the advice. If you want me, I'll be in the last carriage. Hengist winked at the clerk, then added, Thanks again, mate. You're welcome, sir, replied the clerk, flashing another tombstone smile. Hengist picked up his change and tickets, turned on his heels, then he and Harriet made their way toward the platform. As they crossed the cobbled yard, Hengist relayed the conversation with the ticket clerk to Harriet. Then a bell was rung somewhere in the station, and uniformed railwaymen appeared out of several buildings, and started inviting the funeral parties to board the train. There then followed a slow exodus as the crowd made their way to the train and then on to the assigned carriages. Hengist and Harriet avoided this collective and possibly problematic embarkation by boarding the last carriage and installing themselves as swiftly as possible. After about 10 minutes, the bell rang again, followed by a hoot of the train's whistle, and the 10:40 a.m. to Brookwood started its journey. Hengist studied his fellow travelers in the carriage. There was a small group of railwaymen, a sour-faced man and his rotund wife, and 5 vicars huddled together deep in conversation. The sight of so many vicars in one place made him smile. What's tickled you, darling? Harriet asked. I was just thinking, what's the collective noun is for a group of vicars, Hengist whispered, nodding his head towards the seated clergyman. You what, darling? You know, you have a flock of sheep and a herd of cattle, yes? So what is it for vicars? Harriet thought about it for a bit, then said, I don't know, my darling, but a font of vicars sounds good, or maybe a collar? Hengist chuckled, then said, Maybe it's a christening of vicars. They both sniggered like 2 school kids. There then came a cough from behind them. They both turned their head to see a white-haired vicar smiling down at them. Prudence, young man. Yes, sorry, vicar, said Hengist sheepishly. You misunderstand me, young man. The collective noun for a group of vicars is prudence. A prudence of vicars. Oh. Thank you, vicar. You're welcome, Mr. Grump, Vicar Hengist Grump, and this is my wife, Harriet. What a lovely name Harriet is. Then, as an afterthought, added, How rude of me. I'm Timothy Twist, the Reverend of the parish of Bethnal Green, at your service. Pleased to meet you, Reverend, said Harriet. I see you're an artist, Mrs. Grump, said Reverend Twist, gesturing towards the sketch pad and paint box next to Harriet. Of a sort, Reverend. I'm not very good, I'm afraid. I'm sure with practice, my dear lady, you will achieve greatness. It's a nice thought, Reverend. Reverend, would I be correct in assuming you are going to Brookwood to officiate at the burial of Big Jack? Inquired Hengist. Yes, I am, young man. Did you know Mr. Willis then? No, not at all. It's just you said you were from Bethnal Green, and we were just talking to a railway guard who mentioned a gentleman called Big Jack from Bethnal Green was being buried today. Oh, I see, Mr. Grump. Yes, I am indeed undertaking that sad task. It's so sad when you lose such a man as Mr. Willis. Reverend Twist lowered his voice and continued. Although it must be said he wasn't one of the more regular attendees of my congregation, and a rough diamond to be sure, but a well-thought-of member of the parish for all that. And God's children come in many guises. How true, Vicar, said Harriet. The railway man also said. Hengist continued. That there is a possibility of, how can I put it? Some of your parishioners may have an axe to grind with another gentleman who is being buried here today. Reverend Twist sighed. Yes, I know to whom you refer, and I have been made aware of the situation, Mr. Grump, but no, I'm sure people will behave in an appropriate manner that befits the occasion. Hengist nodded acceptance of this statement, but sensed that the clergyman had his doubts. I'm relieved to hear that, Vicar, he added. Indeed. Well, I mustn't intrude on your time. Lovely to meet you both. With that, the Reverend Twist excused himself, and Hengist and Harriet settled back in their seats as the train made its way along the track to Brookwood. The 30-minute journey was swiftly completed, and the train slowed, then came to a halt. Hengist and Harriet collected their bags together, but remained in their seats, as the other travelers sorted themselves out and slowly left the carriage. The Reverend Twist smiled at Hengist and Harriet as he passed, scuttling off to tend to his potentially troublesome flock. Chapter 25. The Rolls-Royce Silver Shadow purred effortlessly down the road, conveying its two occupants along in comfort and style. This, coupled with the weather that morning being bright and crisp, the journey should have been a pleasant one. This, however, was not to be, as one problem soon became apparent: the lack of road signs. Due to the threat of invasion, Council Works departments the length and breadth of the country had been instructed to remove all road signs that could be of any conceivable use to any invading Germans trying to navigate their way through the countryside. This reasonable invasion precaution had the drawback of making it just as difficult for any other native traveler to find their route anywhere outside their local area. This lack of nomenclature caused Plumley's and Shelby's journey to Brookwood to be punctuated by numerous tedious stops to ask directions, several detours of varying lengths when a wrong turn was taken, and one particularly acrimonious interaction with an elderly lady who refused, point-blankly, to furnish Plumley any information at all. Due to her suspicion, he was a German parachutist on a sabotage mission. Plumley's arrogance and bluster had no effect on this matriarch. She would not shift her position even when Plumley asked her. For God's sake, woman, what bloody German spy would drive a Rolls-Royce? A cunning or rich one would, the old lady replied. The meeting concluded with Plumley shouting out of the car window that the old woman was living proof the village idiot was alive and well. He received his reply in the form of the age-old two-fingered salute. But despite these trials and tribulations, the Rolls eventually turned into Brookwood burial ground. Plumley continued up the well-tended gravel lane, then brought the Rolls to a stop outside a red-bricked building. Plumley then turned to Shelby and snapped. Well, off you pop, old boy. Pardon, Ronald? Go find out where this whittle is to be found, man. Then added, that is what we've come for, isn't it? Where Shelby started. Plumley took a deep breath. In there is my bet, Shelby, he said, failing to keep the sarcasm out of his voice. It dawned on him if he didn't give clear instructions to this half-wit, they could be here sometime. He swallowed back his bad temper. It's simple, Shelby. Just go over there, he pointed at the red brick building, and tell them you have come to pay your respects to a dear family friend, and could they give directions to the correct plot. Think you can manage that simple task? Yes, of course, Ronald, replied Shelby, getting out of the car, walking across the gravel. As he reached the corner of the building, a man appeared. Plumley watched the two men converse for a full minute before Shelby returned to the car, and the other man went on his way. What did you find out? Well, I said to him what you said, you know, old family friend, last respects, etc. Yes, what did he say? He said, sorry, I don't work here. He said, why then, you fool, have you come back? Get back over there and find someone who does. Won't do any good if I do. Why in God's name not? The cemetery office is half a mile further on. Plumlee gritted his teeth and wrenched at the ignition key and drove off in a shower of dirt and gravel. His blood pressure had just dropped out of the danger zone when another red brick building came into sight. Unlike the first, this one sported a railway line. After coming to a stop in another shower of gravel, Plumlee turned malevolently towards his partner in crime, and in a frighteningly calm and steady tone said, now, Shelby, as you know, I am as a rule a genial man and not prone to violence. Shelby knew the opposite, but thought it best to keep quiet about this contradiction. Plumlee continued, but if you ask one more stupid question or not back in 5 minutes with the information we require, I will take great pleasure in making it impossible for you and the unfortunate woman who marries you to ever have children. Understand? Shelby scuttled out of the car in search of the site office. He returned 10 minutes later, sat back in the car and was just about to speak, when Plumlee held up his hand to stop him. His temper had not abated much. You found the office? Shelby nodded. Was there someone there who could help? Shelby nodded again. Do you now know where he is? Yet again Shelby nodded. And you have directions? Shelby didn't nod this time, but held up a piece of paper in reply. Good man. Plumlee's mood was lifting as he felt he was getting closer to the prize. Which way then, old man? Shelby pointed to a turning past the building. Plumlee turned the engine over, engaged gear, and drove away. If he had bothered to look in his rear-view mirror as he drove off, he would have seen a small train puffing into sight as it approached the end of its line platform next to the red brick building. Well, old boy, what are we looking for? Said Plumlee, when they were clear of the station. Shelby considered it was now safe to speak. The lady said it was down this road, past the lake, straight on at the White Tower, and his monument is in Area 21, which is about 500 yards on the left. Where in this area, 20, old fruit? These areas can cover a lot of ground, you know. She said there is no record of that due to its age, but I mean, how many green angels can there be there? Good point, Shelby, good point, but we'll soon find out, old boy. Soon the lake was behind them. That must be the White Tower, Ronald, said Shelby, as they passed a hideous Victorian marble bell tower. Slow down, we must nearly be there. Plumlee obliged, and they slowed to walking pace. What's that? Plumlee asked, pointing to a whitewashed post at the side of the road. As they pulled level with the post, the number 21 was clearly seen. Stop, Ronald, we're here. Plumlee stopped the car, turned off the engine, and they both got out. Looking around for the first time, the scale of the cemetery became apparent. Bugger me, old boy, there must be thousands of graves here with hundreds of monuments. When Shelby did not reply, he added, Shelby, are you listening? There are. Yes, Ronald, but I see an angel, Shelby interrupted, frantically pointing to a sizable marble pedestal whose top was adorned with a verdigris angel. This angelic perch was surrounded in haphazard way by numerous headstones and a fair amount of vegetation, but it was no more than 30 feet from the road. Plumlee smiled. Shelby, old fruit, if that's the right angel, we have had more luck than we deserve. Let's go see. Chapter 26. Hengist and Harriet exited the carriage. Looking up the platform, they saw a hive of activity. Mourners were being shepherded into their individual groups by fussing vicars. Railway employees removed the coffins from carriages, placing them on small trolleys, with an ease and efficiency that only comes with long practice. Mothers fussed over their children as fathers watched on. One sight, however, commanded the scene. Further up the platform, in the middle of the assembled throng, a black lacquered horse-drawn funeral carriage gleamed in the sunlight. Its spotless glass sparkled, its brass fixtures shone like Aztec gold. The two black stallions harnessed between its shafts were stunning examples of the equine form, standing motionless and contemptibly aloof as lesser mortals paid them homage. Some worshippers even offered tribute in the form of a sugar lump or an apple. A few of these offerings were begrudgingly accepted. Others were contemptuously dismissed with a flick of the head. "Well," Hengist said, "if you got to go, best to go in style. Beautiful, aren't they, darling? Mind you, it blows out the idea that in death we're all equal," Hengist said as a plain pine coffin on its trolley made its tortured way through the crowd and past the stunning bier and its horses. "That's as maybe, darling, but we don't have time for that," Harriet said. "You're right, Petal," Hengist replied. "Okay, where's that cemetery office? We need someone to ask, darling." "Or we could just follow the sign." Hengist pointed up at a wall with several signs attached, one of which professed the way to the cemetery office. "Yes, I suppose we could do that," replied Harriet light-heartedly. They started off up the platform, but soon were shuffling at a snail's pace along with everybody else, as the crowd slowed to navigate through the bottleneck between the bier and the platform edge. It was as Hengist came alongside the bier he became aware of a young boy of about 12 years old at his side. The young lad was holding a brown paper bag out of which he fished a large sweet that he quickly stuffed it in his mouth. Noticing Hengist was watching him, the lad offered up the bag. "Want one, mister?" the lad asked. "No thanks, son." "They're Uncle Joe's mint balls, mister, the really hot ones," said the young lad, offering Hengist the bag again. "Thanks for asking, son, but you keep them. I'm not too keen on sweets as a rule." The boy shrugged his shoulders with an expression on his face that said, "It's up to you, Sunbeam," and turned away. Just as they reached the horses, the sweet-munching young lad turned again to Hengist and with a smile said, "I know you don't like sweets, mister, but let's see if this horse do." Then, quick as a flash, he lifted the animal's tail and shoved one of Uncle Joe's mint balls straight up its ass, then dashed away through the crowd like a greased eel. "Did you see that?" Hengist exclaimed to Harriet. "See what, darling?" That lad just... Hengist was stopped mid-explanation as the horse started intently swishing its tail and stomping its hooves. "Best we get the hell out of here," Hengist said, grabbing Harriet by the arm and pulling her on through the crowd. "What? Why? What's the matter?" she said, squealing in protest at being manhandled in such a way. Any explanation Hengist could have given became superfluous, as behind them the violated stallion reared up on its hind legs and whinnying his discomfort. Bringing his front legs back to ground, he started bucking and stomping against the shafts of the bier in a futile attempt to escape the sensation Uncle Joe's confectionery was perpetrating in his back passage. The immaculately dressed bier driver, who up until then had sat statuesque atop the bier, started pulling frantically on the reins in the vain hope of controlling the distraught animal. This only had the effect of startling the other horse of the team, who also became equally agitated. People near the horses shied away, not fancying a pissed-off 18-hands-high stallion doing a tap dance up and down their spine. This soon became a frenzied exodus. The bier's coachman lost the battle to calm the horse. His black ribbon top hat flew into the air as the horse team strained and thrashed against its tack. The horses kicked out, smashing their iron-clad hooves into the high-polished finish of the bier. They then decided as one to vacate the area. This movement was very fitful to start with, due to the demented attempts of the driver, and a few of the mourners behind pulling back at the rear. Hengist's passage through the crowd was checked by a shrill "Hengist!" from Harriet. Stopping, she pulled Hengist close and screamed again. "Hengist? The vicar!" It was then he looked back, to the realization that his wife's screams were not out of fear for herself, but for the Reverend Twist. A victim of his own public spiritedness, he was attempting to calm the animals as the horse team bucked and thrashed about. He stood, arms stretched out as if he was Moses trying to part the Red Sea. "He'll be killed," shrieked Harriet. "Oh, bollocks. Stay here," Hengist said, and ran towards the Reverend Twist, who was walking backwards as the panicked horse jerked forward towards him. Both horses, deciding they were best off out of it, went up on their hind legs together and came down at the run. Hengist only reached the vicar. He just had time to push the Reverend Twist clear. Hengist himself was not that lucky. The horses stampeded forward, pushing him to the floor. He threw his arm out and just managed to grasp the cross harness between the animals and pull himself clear of their hooves. The horses, with its carriage attached, shot off down the platform, scattering the crowd as it went. Hengist hanging on for dear life to the cross harness as his feet were dragged over the cobbles. Chapter 27. Weaving their way around several of the headstones, Plumley and Shelby found themselves at the base of the pedestal. Pulling aside some climbing ivy, they were soon looking at a name chiseled expertly into the marble. "Well, old boy, looks like this is the one." "Where is the stuff supposed to be hidden?" said Plumley. "Behind the middle sconce," it said. They both looked up to a row of weathered brass candle holders that graced the top edge of the marble plinth. "Ah, a bit high, aren't they?" mused Plumley. "Never thought of that." "Evidently, old boy, still we'll give it a go. Pick me up." "Lift you up?" "I'll never do it," Shelby spluttered. Plumley looked at the weedy build of Shelby, then at his own expansive waistline, and had to admit Shelby had a point. Okay, I'll lift you," said Plumley reluctantly. After a good look around to make sure they were not being observed, they prepared themselves under the middle sconce. "On the count of 3 then," Plumley suggested, starting the count. 1, 2, 3. There then followed an unseemly scramble that resulted in Shelby grasping the sconce with both hands, trying with all his might to work it free, while Plumley struggled to keep Shelby's feet the required distance off the ground. This attempt lasted 30 seconds, after which they both collapsed in a panting heap. "I'm sure it moved," Shelby said when he had caught his breath. So they tried again. That attempt lasted 10 seconds. They needed a different plan. "I need something to use as a crowbar to work the candle holder thing free," said Shelby, rubbing his now sore hands. "What about using the tire lever from the repair kit of the roller?" said Plumley. "Great idea. I'll go get it, Ronald." Shelby rushed to the car and came back with not just the tire lever, but the spare wheel. "Why in hell did you bring that? You can't lever anything with a bloody tire." "No, look." Shelby placed the wheel upright against the marble of the pedestal, then putting his right foot on the tire said, "Get ready to steady me." Plumley caught on. "Of course, old man." With that, Shelby sprung up on top of the tire, and with Plumley holding him steady, started to work with the tire lever to loosen the sconce. After a couple of minutes, the thing started to move. "It's coming. It's coming." Plumley heard the grating of metal on stone. "Got the damn thing. I'm coming down." With both feet back on the ground, he handed the now twisted and deformed candle sconce to Plumley. They both looked at the object then as one turned to face the pedestal. There was a neat fist-sized hole into the marble that had been hidden by the sconce. "It must be in there, Shelby. Up you go." With no further encouragement needed, Shelby was back atop the tire, then pausing for a second, slowly put his hand into the hole. "What's there, man?" Plumley said. "Nothing yet." What oh? I can feel something." Get it out, Plumley encouraged. "I'm trying." "For God's sake, Shelby." With that, Shelby pulled a moldy and worn leather pouch out of the hole. As the last piece came free, the pouch crumbled into pieces in Shelby's hand, resulting in a cascade of gold coins falling to the floor. Plumley was so transfixed watching the shower of gold coins, he mistakenly relaxed his grip on Shelby, who, being somewhat distracted himself, lost his balance and collapsed onto the grass, taking Plumley with him. They found themselves on their knees, surrounded by what could be dozens of gold coins. Looking at each other, they grinned. It was then they heard the horses.